It was a Tuesday evening, exactly 7 days before my little sister Chloe's picture-perfect wedding. And I was standing in the doorway of our family kitchen, watching my world collapse in slow motion. The air was thick with the scent of lavender, those overpriced candles Mom kept burning because Chloe once declared they made the house feel sophisticated, and the old fridge in the corner hummed its familiar tune, a sound so constant I'd tuned it out my whole life until that moment. I'd only stopped by to drop off a bag of clothes for Mom's charity drive, figuring I'd raid the fridge for a late snack before heading back to my cramped apartment across town. The day had been long, 8 hours at the office, a spilled coffee on my desk, a nagging headache that wouldn't quit, and all I wanted was a quiet minute to breathe. Instead, I got this. My boyfriend Jake, the guy I'd been with for 2 years, the one I'd imagined lazy Sundays and a scrappy little future with, locked in a kiss with Chloe, my spoiled, selfish, soon-to-be-married sister. Her hands, nails painted a pristine bridal white, were buried in his dark, messy hair, tugging at it like she owned him. His rough, mechanic's hands, fingers I'd watched fix my busted car radio a dozen times, were clamped around her waist, pulling her closer, her silky pajama top bunching under his grip. They were so wrapped up in each other, lost in some private bubble, that they didn't hear the floor creak as I shifted my weight, didn't see me standing there, a frozen statue with my heart hammering so loud I thought it'd give me away. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I couldn't. My body took over where my mind failed, turning me around and guiding me out of the kitchen, my sneakers whispering against the hardwood as I slipped away like I'd never been there. My legs felt like jelly, my breath shallow and ragged, but I kept moving, climbing the stairs to my old bedroom on autopilot. The door clicked shut behind me, and I collapsed onto the twin bed, the faded purple comforter crumpling under my weight. The ceiling stared back, speckled with those glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck up when I was 12, back when Chloe was just my annoying little sister who'd steal my crayons, not my entire life. I yanked my phone from my pocket, my thumb hovering over Jake's name, itching to call him to demand, "What the hell was that? How could you?" But my hand froze. The words felt too small, too fragile for the storm raging inside me. Instead, I pulled the blanket over my head, curling into a ball as the tears came, hot and silent, soaking into the fabric while my mind spun out of control. Who even were these people? Chloe. God, she's always been a Category 5 hurricane in human form. She's 24, 3 years younger than me, and from the day she was born, she's been the golden child, the princess of our family. Big blue eyes, a pout that could melt glaciers, and a voice that somehow twisted Mom and Dad around her finger. When we were kids, she'd cry for an extra cookie, and I'd watch Mom cave while I nibbled my single one. By middle school, it was new jeans and glittery phone cases while I patched holes in my sneakers. High school, she got a red convertible the day she passed her driver's test, Dad beaming like she'd won a Nobel Prize while I biked 3 miles to my waitressing gig at the diner. I didn't mind, not really. I loved her, even when she'd throw tantrums over a bad hair day or hog the bathroom for hours. I was the steady one, good grades, part-time jobs, no drama, while Chloe was the wildfire, bright and loud and impossible to ignore. She'd always been selfish, sure, but this? Kissing my boyfriend a week before her wedding? That wasn't just selfish, that was a betrayal, so sharp it felt like she'd reached into my chest and ripped something out. And Jake, where do I even start with him? He's 28, scruffy and rough-edged, with a beard that's always a little uneven and hands that smell like motor oil and coffee. We met 2 years ago at this dive bar near my old place, both reaching for the jukebox to play Stairway to Heaven, laughing when our hands bumped. He bought me a beer, cracked a dumb line. "You look like trouble, and I'm good at fixing things." And I was hooked. He's a mechanic, spends his days under cars and his nights tinkering with his beat-up Ford in the garage. He's not polished like Chloe's fiancé, Ethan, no grand gestures or poetic promises, but he's real, or was. He'd show up with takeout after my long shifts, toss me his flannel when the wind picked up, hum old rock tunes while I curled up next to him. We'd talk about a future sometimes, nothing fancy, just a little house with a porch swing and maybe a mutt from the shelter. I trusted him, led him into my messy, unglamorous life, and he fit there. Seeing him with Chloe, it wasn't just the kiss that gutted me. It was how easy it looked, how natural, like he belonged with her more than he ever did with me. Under that blanket, I replayed it all. The way her engagement ring flashed under the kitchen lights as she touched him. The soft laugh she let out before their lips met. The way his hands slid down her back like they'd done it 100 times. My stomach churned. My head throbbed, and I couldn't stop the questions. How long had this been going on? Was it a one-time thing? A stupid mistake fueled by late-night wine? Or had they been sneaking around for weeks, months, laughing at me while I planned dinner dates with him and bridesmaid duties for her? Chloe was engaged to Ethan, perfect, patient Ethan, who'd been planning her dream wedding like it was his life's work. And Jake, he was mine, or so I'd thought. Now, they'd turned me into the fool, the invisible third wheel in my own story. I stayed there, curled up and crying, until the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, my eyes swollen and my throat raw, knowing one thing for sure. This wasn't something I could just swallow and forget. The kitchen scene burned behind my eyes like a brand as I lay there under the blanket in my old bedroom, the faint glow of those childhood stars mocking me from the ceiling. It was past midnight now, the house silent, except for the occasional creak of the walls settling, but sleep was a distant dream, something for people whose lives weren't imploding. My phone sat on the nightstand, screen dark, Jake's name still taunting me from the call log I hadn't dared to open. The tears had stopped, leaving my face sticky and my throat tight, but my mind wouldn't quit. It was a hamster wheel of rage, hurt, and questions with no answers. How could Chloe do this? How could Jake? And what the hell was I supposed to do now, with her wedding, a week away, looming like a storm cloud I couldn't outrun? I kicked the blanket off, the air cool against my damp skin, and sat up, running my hands through my tangled hair as I tried to make sense of the mess I'd stumbled into. I couldn't confront them, not yet. The thought of facing Chloe's smug pout or Jake's half-assed excuses made my stomach twist, and I wasn't sure I could keep from screaming or sobbing if I did. But doing nothing felt worse, like swallowing broken glass and pretending it didn't cut. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through old texts from Jake. "Miss you, babe. Work's a killer today. Said just last week," or "You're stuck with me. Deal with it." From a month ago when we'd laughed over burnt pancakes at his place. Each one stung now, a lie I'd been too blind to see. Then there were Chloe's messages. "Can you pick up my veil tomorrow? You're the best." All chirpy and demanding, like I was her personal assistant instead of her sister. I tossed the phone onto the bed, my chest heaving as I pictured them together again. Her giggle, his hands, that kiss that wasn't a fluke but a betrayal with roots I couldn't yet trace. I needed air, needed to think, so I slipped downstairs, past the kitchen I couldn't bear to look at, and out to the back porch, where the night was crisp and the stars, real ones this time, felt impossibly far away. Sitting on the splintered steps, the cold seeping through my jeans, I let the memories flood in, years of Chloe's selfishness piling up like evidence I should have seen coming. She'd always been this way, hadn't she? When we were 8 and 11, she'd borrowed my favorite doll, the one Grandma gave me before she passed, and ripped its head off during a tantrum, crying to Mom that I'd made her mad until I got grounded for not sharing. In high school, she'd flirted with my first boyfriend, Tim, at a family barbecue, batting her lashes while he blushed, and I brushed it off as her just being Chloe, attention-hungry but harmless. Mom and Dad never saw it or didn't want to. "She's just spirited," Mom would say, or "You're older. Be the bigger person," from Dad. I'd swallowed it every time, cleaned up her messes, smiled through her tantrums because she was my sister and I loved her. But this wasn't a torn doll or a flirty giggle. This was Jake, my Jake, and she'd crossed a line I didn't know how to uncross. Then there was Jake. 2 years of him woven into my life like thread I couldn't pull out without unraveling everything. I thought back to our first date, a greasy diner after that bar night, splitting fries and talking about our favorite Zeppelin tracks until the waitress kicked us out at closing. Or the time my car broke down last winter, and he showed up at 2 a.m. with a toolbox and a thermos of coffee, grumbling about the cold but fixing it anyway, his breath fogging in the headlights as I watched from the passenger seat. He wasn't perfect, late half the time, terrible at texting back, prone to leaving oil-stained rags on my couch, but he was mine. We'd spent nights dreaming out loud, sprawled on his garage floor with beers, plotting a life, a fixer-upper house, a mutt named Zeppelin, maybe kids someday. I'd let him in, past my walls, past the chaos of my family, and he'd fit there. Or so I'd thought. Now, every memory felt tainted. Had he been texting her when he said he was working late? Had he laughed with her about me, the clueless girlfriend who didn't suspect a thing? The thought made me want to hurl my phone into the yard, but I just clutched it tighter, my knuckles white. By the time the sky started to lighten, a faint pink creeping over the trees, I'd circled back to one truth. Ethan, Chloe's fiancé, the guy who'd been nothing but good to her, to me, to everyone, deserved to know. He was 30, steady as a rock, with warm brown eyes and a quiet laugh that put you at ease. They'd met 2 years ago at some gallery opening, She'd spilled wine on his shirt, he'd joked it was her best pickup line, and they'd been glued together since. He'd proposed on a beach last summer, down on one knee with the sun setting behind him, and Chloe had squealed about it for weeks, flashing that diamond like a trophy. Ethan was different from Jake, polished, patient, the kind of guy who remembered your coffee order and asked about your day like he meant it. He'd been kind to me too, always checking in. How's the job going? Or are you holding up with all this wedding craziness? Making me feel seen in a family where Chloe usually hogged the light. He'd poured months into this wedding, venue tours, cake tastings, calming her meltdowns over the guest list, and now she was cheating on him with my boyfriend. The unfairness of it hit me like a punch, and I knew I couldn't let him walk into that marriage blind. But telling him it wasn't simple. What if he didn't believe me? What if he did, and it broke him? The wedding was 7 days away, invitations sent, deposits paid, relatives booking flights. Canceling it would be a tsunami, and I'd be the one who triggered it. I paced the porch, the wood creaking under my socks, imagining the fallout: Chloe's tears, Mom's lectures, Dad's disappointment. I'd be the villain, the sister who ruined her big day, even though she'd done this. And Jake, what if Ethan confronted him, and it blew back on me? I stopped, leaning against the railing, my breath fogging in the dawn chill. Loyalty to Chloe tugged at me. She was family, flaws and all, but fairness to Ethan pulled harder. He didn't deserve this lie, this betrayal, dressed up in white lace. I had to tell him, even if it meant torching everything. Back upstairs, I brewed a pot of coffee, the bitter smell grounding me as I rehearsed what I'd say. My hands shook as I poured a mug, spilling half of it on the counter, and I cursed under my breath, wiping it up with a trembling paper towel. The clock read 7:03 a.m. early, but I couldn't wait. I grabbed my phone, found Ethan's number, and hit call before I could chicken out. It rang twice, 3 times, and then his voice, calm, a little groggy, came through. "Hey, it's early. Everything okay?" My throat tightened, but I forced it out. "Ethan, it's me. I need to tell you something. It's about Chloe." He went quiet, and I stumbled through it, how I'd walked into the kitchen, seen her kissing Jake, stood there watching until I couldn't anymore. My voice cracked, but I kept going, laying it bare. When I finished, the silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. "Thanks for telling me," he said finally, his tone flat like he was reading a script. No anger, no questions, just that. Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone, my coffee cooling in my hands, waiting for a text, a callback, something. Nothing came. An hour passed, then 2, and doubt crept in. Did he not believe me? Was he too shocked to react? Or worst of all, did he know and just not care? The wedding was too close, too big to stop. Maybe he'd bury it, marry her anyway, and I'd just made it worse. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands, wondering if I'd just lit a match I couldn't put out. The phone call to Ethan left me hollow, like I dropped a boulder into a still pond and was waiting for the ripples that never came. His flat, "Thanks for telling me," echoed in my head as I sat on the couch, the untouched coffee cold in my mug, the morning lights spilling through the living room curtains in a way that felt too bright, too normal for the chaos inside me. It was Wednesday now, 6 days until Chloe's wedding, and the silence from Ethan gnawed at me. No follow-up text, no angry call, nothing, just that eerie calm that made me question everything. Had I imagined the weight of what I'd told him? Was he in denial, too tangled in wedding plans to face it? Or, worse, did he know about Chloe and Jake and just didn't care? I kept checking my phone, refreshing the screen like it'd summon a reaction, but it stayed blank. By noon, I'd convinced myself he was going to ignore it, bury the truth under floral arrangements and vows, marry her anyway, and leave me holding this secret like a live grenade I couldn't throw. The thought made me sick, but I couldn't force him to act. I'd done my part, and now I was stuck, trapped in a week that was supposed to be all about Chloe, pretending nothing had changed. The house buzzed back to life by mid-afternoon, Mom bustling in with grocery bags for some pre-wedding dinner she'd planned, Dad trailing behind with a stack of RSVPs he was grumbling about. "You staying for lunch?" Mom called, oblivious to the storm brewing under my skin. I nodded, too drained to argue, and shuffled to the kitchen, bracing myself as I crossed the threshold where I'd seen them last night. The lavender candles were gone, replaced by the sharp tang of lemons from a cleaner Mom must have used, but I could still picture it. Chloe's hands in Jake's hair, his grip on her waist, like a ghost image burned into the tiles. I grabbed a soda from the fridge, my hands trembling as I popped the tab, and forced myself to sit at the table, nodding along as Mom rattled off her to-do list. Pick up the cake topper, call the florist, make sure Chloe's veil was steamed. "You're still helping with the bridesmaid stuff, right?" she asked, glancing at me over a pile of carrots she was chopping. Yeah, I mumbled, my voice a stranger's, and she didn't notice the strain, too caught up in her perfect daughter's perfect day. Chloe swept in an hour later, a whirlwind of giggles and perfume, her arms full of shopping bags from some boutique downtown. "Oh my God, you guys, I found the cutest earrings for the reception," she squealed, dumping the bags on the counter and pulling out a pair of dangling gold hoops that probably cost more than my rent. She twirled them in front of me, her engagement ring flashing under the lights, and I felt a jolt, like that ring was mocking me, a reminder of what she'd done while Ethan paid for it. "What do you think?" she asked, her blue eyes wide and expectant. I forced a smile, my lips tight. "They're great," I said, the words tasting like ash, and she beamed, oblivious, launching into a rant about how the florist better not screw up her peonies. Watching her prance around, so smug and carefree, lit a fire in me. Anger, yes, but also disbelief. Did she know I'd seen? Was she that good at pretending, or did she just not care? Every laugh, every flip of her hair, felt like a taunt, and I had to dig my nails into my palms to keep from snapping. The next few days blurred into a haze of wedding prep I couldn't escape. Thursday was dress fittings at this upscale bridal shop an hour away, and I stood in the mirrored room with the other bridesmaids, Chloe's giggling posse of high school friends, while she spun in her gown, a cascading lace thing that hugged her like a second skin. "Isn't it just so me?" she gushed, and they cooed like trained parrots, snapping pics for her Instagram. I adjusted my pale blue bridesmaid dress, the fabric itching against my skin, and nodded along, my stomach churning as I caught her reflection. Perfect, radiant, untouchable. She didn't mention Jake, didn't flinch when I looked at her too long, just kept chattering about her veil and the vibe she wanted for the reception. I wanted to grab her, shake her, scream, "How can you stand there acting like nothing happened?" But I didn't. I smiled, I clapped, I played my part, because what else could I do with 4 days left and a room full of witnesses? Jake, meanwhile, was a ghost. He texted me that Wednesday night, "Need some space to think, talk later," and then nothing. No calls, no apologies, just silence that cut deeper every day. I saw his truck parked outside his garage once when I drove by on Friday, the hood up like he was working, but I didn't stop. My pride wouldn't let me, and honestly, I wasn't ready for his excuses. It was a mistake, or she came on to me, because they'd all be lies, and I'd heard enough of those. I kept replaying that kiss, wondering how long he'd been hers instead of mine, and the ache in my chest grew heavier, a weight I carried through every forced smile and bridesmaid duty. He'd be at the wedding, I knew that much. Invited as my +1 months ago, and the thought of facing him there, with Chloe in her white dress, made me want to run and never look back. Ethan showed up Saturday, 3 days out, for the rehearsal dinner at this fancy Italian place Mom had booked. He walked in wearing a navy suit, his hair neat, his smile as warm as ever, and my heart sank. I'd been watching for cracks, red eyes, a tense jaw, anything to show he'd processed what I told him, but he was flawless, shaking hands with Dad, kissing Mom's cheek, hugging Chloe like she was his whole world. When he got to me, he pulled me into a quick, polite squeeze. "Thanks for all the help with this," he said, his voice steady, his brown eyes meeting mine with no hint of pain. I searched his face, desperate for a sign, anger, hurt, even a flicker of doubt, but there was nothing. Just that calm, steady Ethanness I'd always admired. "No problem," I managed, my throat dry, and he moved on, leaving me reeling. He'd ignored it, I was sure now. He'd heard me, filed it away, and decided to let it slide. The wedding was too close, too big, too perfect to derail. I felt a pang of guilt for telling him, like I'd burdened him with something he couldn't handle, but also a spark of resentment. How could you be so weak? The rehearsal itself was torture. Chloe flounced down the aisle in a practice run, giggling as Ethan took her hand at the altar, the efficient droning about timing and cues. I stood with the bridesmaids, my heels pinching, my fake smile plastered on as Mom dabbed her eyes and Dad snapped photos. "You two are just perfect," Mom said, and Chloe beamed, squeezing Ethan's arm while I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Perfect. Right. If only they knew. The dinner dragged on. Pasta, wine, toasts about love and forever. And I sat there, picking at my food, watching Ethan laugh at Chloe's jokes, watching Jake's empty chair next to me, feeling like a fraud in my own family. By Sunday, the day before the wedding, I was a wreck, snapping at Mom over table settings, hiding in the bathroom to breathe, dreading the moment I'd have to face it all. Chloe was oblivious, Jake was gone, Ethan was a statue, and I was the only one carrying the truth, a secret I couldn't shake, as the clock ticked down to her big day. Let's roll into part 4. The wedding day bombshell. Ethan's mic drop moment. This is the climax. The wedding day where everything explodes, picking up right after the tense calm of the prep week. I'll deliver another 2,900-word expansion, keeping it seamless, dramatic, and packed with vivid details to captivate the YouTube audience. This part takes us from the idyllic ceremony to Ethan's jaw-dropping reveal, Chloe's collapse, and my whirlwind of emotions, flowing naturally into the fallout of Part 5. Here we go. Part 4, the wedding day bombshell. Ethan's mic drop moment. The morning of Chloe's wedding dawned like a postcard. Clear blue skies, a soft breeze rustling the trees, the kind of weather she'd prayed for and bragged about nailing with her good vibes. I woke up in my old bedroom, the house already humming with pre-wedding chaos, Mom shouting about missing hairpins, Dad grumbling over his tie, the distant chatter of Chloe's bridesmaids spilling from her room down the hall. My head throbbed from a night of fitful sleep. Dreams tangled with flashes of that kitchen kiss and Ethan's flat voice on the phone. 6 days had passed since I told him. 6 days of silence and pretending, and now here we were, her big day, the one I dreaded since I'd caught her with Jake. I dragged myself out of bed, splashing cold water on my face in the bathroom, staring at my reflection, pale, puffy-eyed, a stranger in my own skin. The pale blue bridesmaid dress hung on the door, taunting me, but I pulled it on, zipping it up with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, knowing I had to play my part one last time. The venue was an hour's drive. A converted barn turned chic event space just outside town, and we piled into Mom's SUV, Chloe in the back, her hair half done, giggling with her friends while I stared out the window, the fields blurring past. "Can you believe it's finally here?" she squealed, clutching her phone as she scrolled through last-minute texts from the planner. I nodded, my throat tight, forcing a "yeah, crazy" that sounded hollow even to me. She didn't notice, too wrapped up in her bubble of bridal bliss, and I let the noise of her chatter fade into static, my mind replaying Ethan's calm, "Thanks for telling me," like a broken record. I'd convinced myself he'd ignored it, swallowed the truth to keep this day intact, and the weight of that sat heavy in my chest. A mix of guilt for telling him and anger that he wouldn't act. By the time we arrived, the barn was a vision, white roses cascading over the beams, fairy lights twinkling against the rustic wood, tables set with crisp linens and little jars of wildflowers. Guests milled around in pastels and suits, sipping cocktails with edible flowers floating in them, their laughter a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. Chloe disappeared into the bridal suite with her posse, and I lingered outside, the air thick with lavender and perfume, watching the chaos unfold. Mom fussed over the seating chart, Dad paced with his phone to his ear, and I spotted Jake in the crowd, slouched near the bar, his tie crooked, his eyes fixed on the ground. My stomach lurched. He'd shown up, my +1 from months ago when we'd been us, and now here he was, avoiding me like I was the plague. I caught him glancing toward the bridal suite once, and the spark of rage in me flared so hot I had to turn away, gripping a glass of water I'd snagged from a passing tray until my knuckles whitened. The ceremony started at 4, right on schedule, the string quartet swelling with some classical piece Chloe had picked, the officiant taking his place under a floral arch dripping with peonies. I lined up with the bridesmaids, my heels sinking into the grass, and watched her walk down the aisle, a vision in white lace, her updo crowned with a veil that shimmered in the sunlight. She smirked, that signature Chloe smirk, smug and radiant, and I felt the bile rise, knowing what she'd done, knowing Ethan stood at the altar waiting for her. He looked perfect, of course, tall and steady in his black tux, his brown eyes soft as he took her hand, his smile warm and unwavering. They said their vows, simple and sweet. "I promise to love and cherish you," her voice lilting, his calm and sure, and I clapped with the crowd, my hands numb, wondering how he could stand there so composed after what I'd told him. The officiant pronounced them married, the guests cheered, and Chloe threw her arms around him, beaming like she'd won the world. I braced myself for the reception, planning to slip away early, drown my feelings in whatever booze I could find, and forget this day ever happened. The barn transformed for the party, long tables piled with roast chicken, truffle mashed potatoes, a 5-tier cake with gold flakes Chloe had obsessed over. The dance floor pulsed with tipsy relatives, the DJ spinning a mix of pop and oldies, and I hovered near the edge, nursing a champagne flute, watching Chloe twirl with Ethan to some slow Ed Sheeran song, her dress fanning out like a dream. Then it happened. The first dance ended, the crowd clapping as Chloe clung to Ethan's arm, glowing with that bride high no one could touch. The DJ handed him the mic for the groom's toast and the room hushed, everyone expecting sappy words about love and forever. I leaned against a beam, my third glass of champagne halfway to my lips, when Ethan adjusted his tie, flashed that easy smile, and said, "Hey folks, before we get too deep into the party, I've got something to say." Chloe giggled beside him, nudging him playfully, probably picturing a gushy tribute to her perfection. My heart thudded. I don't know why, but I felt it, a shift, a crack in the air. He turned to her and his smile vanished, his face hardening into something I'd never seen. Cold, deliberate, razor sharp. "Chloe," he said, his voice steady but edged with ice. "I know what you did. I know about Jake. Your sister caught you two kissing in the kitchen a week ago. She told me everything, how you didn't even see her standing there." The room sucked in a collective breath, a gasp so loud it bounced off the rafters. Chloe's face drained of color, her mouth flapping open like a fish yanked from water, her eyes darting to me in panic. Ethan didn't flinch. "I thought about calling this off, walking away quietly. But you love the spotlight, don't you? So I figured I'd let you have your big day, then take it all away. We're done. This marriage is over before it's even begun." He dropped the mic, let it thud to the wooden floor with a screech of feedback, and strode off the stage, his shoulders square, leaving her there, a trembling wreck in her white gown. The barn erupted. Guests shouted, whispered, fumbled for phones to record. Did he just? Oh my God, what? A wave of chaos crashing over the perfect scene. Chloe let out a wail, a piercing sob that cut through the noise, and spun toward me, her mascara streaking into black rivers. "You bitch, you ruined everything," she screamed, her voice raw, her hands clawing at the air like she'd lunge if she could. Her bridesmaids swarmed her, fanning her face, tugging at her arms, but she shoved them off, stomping her heels into the floor, her bouquet tumbling from her grip and smashing against a chair. Mom gasped, clutching Dad's arm, her eyes wide with shock. "What's happening?" While he barked, "Somebody explain this!" Over the growing din. Jake bolted. I saw him slip out a side door, his head down, gone before anyone could grab him. I stood there, rooted by the beam, my champagne glass trembling in my hand as the room spun around me, part horrified, part electrified. Ethan had done it, played it cool all week, let her think she'd won, then ripped the rug out from under her in front of 200 people. It was brutal, calculated, a masterstroke, and she deserved every second of it. The chaos stretched on, Chloe sobbing hysterically, guests buzzing like bees, the DJ fumbling to restart the music as if that'd fix it. My parents rushed to her, Mom crying, "Honey, what's wrong?" While Dad glared at me like I'd lit the fuse. I didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her unravel, her perfect day, her perfect lie, shattered by the truth I'd handed Ethan. Part of me felt sick, seeing my sister fall apart, but another part, a bigger part, felt a twisted thrill, a vindication I hadn't expected. She'd crossed me, crossed him, and now the mask was off. Ethan was gone, vanished into the night, and I was left standing in the wreckage, caught between guilt and awe at what he'd pulled off. The barn was a war zone after Ethan dropped the mic and walked out, leaving Chloe a sobbing heap in her white dress and the reception spiraling into chaos. The thud of that microphone still rang in my ears, a gunshot that shattered her perfect day. And I stood there by the beam, my champagne glass trembling in my hand as the room exploded around me. Guests swarmed like ants, some rushing to Chloe, others whispering in tight clusters, their phones flashing as they recorded the meltdown for posterity. Did he just end it? I heard someone gasp, while another voice hissed, "She cheated with her sister's boyfriend?" The DJ fumbled with the sound system, blasting some upbeat pop song that clashed with the hysteria, and I watched, frozen, as Chloe's wail cut through it all, a raw, guttural cry that turned every head. "You bitch, you ruined my life," she screamed at me, her mascara-streaked face twisting with rage, her hands flailing as her bridesmaids grabbed her arms to keep her from charging. Her bouquet lay smashed on the floor, petals scattered like confetti from a nightmare, and I felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes swinging between us, hers wild with fury, mine wide with shock. Mom reached her first, dropping to her knees beside Chloe, her own tears spilling as she clutched her daughter's trembling shoulders. "Honey, what's happening? Talk to me," she begged, her voice cracking, while Dad stormed over, his face red and his tie askew. "Somebody better explain this right now," he bellowed, his glare landing on me like I'd orchestrated the whole thing. Chloe shoved Mom off, stumbling to her feet, her veil tangled in her updo as she pointed a shaking finger my way. "She did this. She told Ethan lies and now he. She choked on a sob, collapsing back into her bridesmaids' arms, their coos drowned out by her hysterics. I opened my mouth to defend myself. She kissed Jake, not me. But the words stuck, drowned by the noise as guests pressed closer, their whispers buzzing like static. "Jake? Who's Jake?" The sister saw it. "Poor Ethan." My parents turned to me, Mom's eyes pleading, Dad's accusing, and I felt the air thicken, the barn walls closing in as the truth I'd carried all week spilled out into the open, messy and unstoppable. I didn't stay to argue. I set my glass down, my hands shaking so hard it clinked against the table, and pushed through the crowd, their stares burning into my back as I headed for the side door. Jake had slipped out earlier. Outside, the night air hit me like a slap, cool and sharp, the stars bright against the black sky, a cruel contrast to the madness I'd left behind. I leaned against the barn, the rough wood snagging my dress, and sucked in a breath, my chest tight as the sounds of Chloe's sobs and the crowd's chatter leaked through the walls. Ethan was gone. I'd seen him stride out, his silhouette vanishing into the parking lot, and Jake was nowhere. A coward who'd run the second the heat turned up. My phone buzzed in my purse, and I yanked it out, expecting mom or dad, but it was a flood of texts from cousins, friends, even a coworker who'd been there. What just happened? Is Chloe okay? Did you know he'd do that? Each one a pinprick I couldn't answer. I silenced it, shoving it back, and sank onto a bench, the cold seeping through my thin dress as I tried to process the wreckage Ethan had left in his wake. Inside, the chaos stretched on. Chloe locked herself in the bridal suite, her wails audible through the door as her friends pounded on it, begging her to come out. "Chloe, please, talk to us." Mom and Dad cornered me when I finally went back in, dragging me to a quiet corner by the dessert table, the untouched cake looming like a monument to her ruined day. "Why didn't you tell us first?" Mom whispered, her napkin crumpled in her fist, her eyes red. "You let this happen at her wedding?" Dad's voice was low, furious. "You should have come to us, not him. What were you thinking?" I snapped, my voice sharper than I meant. "She did this, not me. She kissed my boyfriend, and Ethan deserved to know I wasn't going to lie for her." Mom flinched, Dad threw up his hands. Family sticks together, and I stormed off, my heels clicking against the floor, done with their excuses. Chloe had crossed the line, not me, but they'd always pick her side. Wouldn't they? The golden child, even when she fell. The night dragged into a ghost town, the guests trickling out, the food cold, the music stopped. Social media lit up by morning. I saw the posts on my phone, blurry videos of Ethan's speech, captions like "wedding drama of the century" and "bride dumped at altar." Chloe stayed home, holed up in her room, refusing to see anyone, while Mom called me non-stop, leaving voicemails I didn't answer. "We need to talk about this, please." Dad texted once, a curt, "Call your mother," and I ignored that too. Jake was gone, no calls, no texts, just a void where he'd been, his truck missing from the garage when I drove by days later. Ethan texted me that night, just 2 words, "Thank you," then nothing, a quiet exit from the mess he detonated. The family group chat blew up with aunts and uncles picking sides, some blaming me. She should have kept it private. Others Chloe. How could she do that? And I muted it. The noise too much when my head was already spinning. Days turned into a week, then 2, and the fallout settled like dust I couldn't sweep away. Chloe finally emerged, calling me one night, her voice hoarse from crying. "You're a traitor," she spat. "I'll never forgive you, my life's ruined because of you." I let her rant, her words cutting but not deep enough to move me anymore. "You ruined it yourself," I said, calm and cold. "You kissed him, not me. Live with it." She hung up, and that was that. Our sisterhood fractured, maybe beyond repair. My parents hovered, trying to mediate, but I kept my distance, tired of their blind defense. The wedding photos, pre-mic drop, popped up online, Chloe's smile haunting me, a lie captured in pixels. Friends asked for the story, and I gave them scraps, too raw to relive it all. Jake's absence left a hole, not love, not anymore, but trust I'd never get back. Ethan vanished, rumor said he'd moved to the coast. Starting over, and I envied him that clean break. Sitting on my apartment balcony one night, the city lights blinking below, I replayed it all, the kiss, the call, the calm, the crash. I'd lost a sister, a boyfriend, a chunk of my family, but I'd gained something too, a clarity, a freedom from their lies. Chloe's perfect world had crumbled, and for once she couldn't blame me out of it. Ethan's move, brutal, brilliant, had set me loose too, in a way I hadn't expected. I wasn't okay, not yet, my heart still ached. My sleep still broke, but I was lighter, unburdened by secrets I'd carried too long. Maybe I'd heal, find someone who didn't trade me for her, rebuild what she'd torched. For now, I was just glad the truth was out, messy and loud, and that Ethan's mic drop had echoed louder than her vows. So what do you think? Ever seen a wedding implode like that? Hit like if you're Team Ethan, comment your wildest family drama, and subscribe. My life's a mess, and there's plenty more where this came from.